Alright folks, we've got another video today about some of the possible fallout and impacts of the coronavirus because that's literally the only thing on the news right now. Now, it has come to my attention that I might need to provide a disclaimer here that I absolutely should not have to provide, but it is the current year, and apparently this is still where we're at. So, for a moment, I'm going to blow your mind. It is, in fact, possible, as you can see from this Venn diagram, that someone can be concerned about the virus and worry about dystopian levels of authoritarian government and worry about the economic impact of this whole thing. Worrying about one should not and does not preclude you from worrying about another, nor does it mean that you want everyone's grandma to die. So where we are in this video and my previous videos on this topic is right here in this middle spot. Now, if you're someone who doesn't think that it's possible to simultaneously be worried about two or more of these things, or if you're someone who thinks I shouldn't talk about this because it's disrespectful to nurses or doctors or all the Karens calling cops on people, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I also suggest you hit the back button because otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. New unemployment claims have hit a record high of about 17 million. The stock market is hitting record drops, and according to the AP, there are now 500 million more people in the world who are facing poverty due to the virus. The economic ramifications of the virus and the resulting shutdowns are very, very real and are all getting their 15 minutes of fame here and there in the news. But it doesn't seem like a lot of people are talking about what happens when the guys who pick the veggies or the people who work at the meat processing plant don't show up because of lockdowns, going out of business, or being sick. And yes, this is something that is happening, and the news is only now starting to catch up. So here is the part where I tell you that if you don't have a long-term plan for your food supply, you need to start, because it's entirely possible that these empty grocery shelves aren't going to get much better, prices are going to skyrocket with hyperinflation, and stores will be hit again in a few months down the line, either A, during a second wave, or B, when we start feeling the full effects of some of today's lockdowns and economic stimulus plans. Things aren't going to just suddenly go back to normal once these shutdown orders are lifted. If you want a comprehensive list of prepping suggestions, go check out my first video on the virus, which I'll stick up here in the cards and down in the description. My Patriot Supply is also still taking orders on 2- and 4-week emergency food kits for my subscribers over at preparewithliberty.com. Like everywhere else, they are experiencing shipping delays, but they're working around the clock, and unlike everyone else, their prices haven't changed and they're not sold out. At least not yet. So if you don't have a plan, go check them out. So that's the what, and now here's the why. Several major meat companies throughout the US and Canada have announced closures due to the virus. Some are temporary, and some are indefinite.
Okay, that sounds like it could be bad. Okay.
Reuters has provided a pretty good list of all the closed plants thus far. JBS has had closures in 2 plants, one in Greeley, Colorado, and another in Pennsylvania. The Greeley plant had a temporary shutdown last week after 36 workers tested positive. But last Monday, before the plant even announced the shutdown, some 830 employees did not report for work, causing a huge bottleneck. And now, in an even newer update, they've actually decided to close the plant completely until April 24th. This plant alone normally accounts for 5% of the US's total daily slaughter. Their Pennsylvania plant also cut production and then announced a closure until April 16th. National Beef Packing Company suspended all slaughters at an Iowa plant with a reopen date of April 13th. That date has now been moved to April 20th. Aurora Packing Company in Illinois has closed completely with no information on when they might reopen. At all. It is total radio silence over there.
Oh, hamburgers, this just keeps on getting worse.
Cargill, a big supplier for U.S. grocery chains, completely closed a plant in Pennsylvania. Tyson, another familiar grocery brand and one of the biggest in the U.S., shut a hog slaughterhouse in Iowa for the entire week of the 6th. An Olymel pork plant in Quebec closed for 2 weeks. Sanderson Farms, a top producer out of Georgia, has reduced chicken production and has ordered over 400 workers to stay home. That's not an exhaustive list by any means, but the biggest one is now Smithfield. Smithfield has announced it's closing one of its South Dakota plants indefinitely. It was previously closed for 3 days of cleaning, then the governor asked them to close for 2 weeks, and now it's just closed. A press release says that they won't be reopening until local, state, and federal government gives them permission. Smithfield is the biggest pork producer in the world. That particular plant alone is responsible for 5% of the U.S.'s pork production and employs a whopping 3,700 people. That's kind of a big deal. Last week, officials were saying there was no danger to the food supply, despite some countries threatening to limit or even stop all exports of major food staples. Other officials were blaming any shortages purely on hoarders. But now, with this closure, people are finally realizing that a national meat shortage is actually possible. Think about it. With more and more plants closing or limiting production, there's less product to fill shelves. With fewer plants to sell to, farmers are left in a financial and production lurch. And while restaurant demand has dropped, grocery store demand has skyrocketed and has already gone beyond current supply. Our current supply lines were not built for that, and they certainly weren't built to adapt as quickly as we need them to. Some farmers and producers are already feeling the crunch. The Wall Street Journal reports that, due to closed restaurants, fewer plants, and slowed processing, farmers and producers are stuck with products they can't sell and are instead dumping their milk, throwing away their eggs, and plowing through fields of vegetables. One Wisconsin creamery alone reports that, due to the coronavirus lockdowns, his sales dropped 95% in 1 day. Now, of course, you might say, well, why don't these farmers sell directly to the public? And the answer to that, my friends, is because the government has laws against it. Not to mention, there are people out there actually demanding that local farmers markets be shut down by law enforcement in order to stop the spread of the virus. There are literally people on my personal Facebook page advocating for a government shutdown of farmers markets, which provide food, because people are allegedly too stupid to make their own choices about the risks of attending an open-air space versus a busy and enclosed grocery store. Giant meteor, take me now. In Florida, a lot of the crops have their biggest harvest in the winter months. Now, those same crops are rotting in the fields, unpicked, or being sold off in bulk for pennies on the dollar. Some farmers have donated them to food banks, but there are also laws around what charities can accept, as well as limits on how much perishable food they can realistically store. Farming is Florida's second biggest economic driver and normally yields about $150 billion and supports 2 million jobs. Now, those numbers are plummeting. And even if these farmers and producers had plants and companies to sell their crops to, they're also facing a shortage of workers as people get sick or just choose to stay home. The factories are feeling this too. As for once things open back up, it's not looking good. Lockdowns forced 30,000 U.S. restaurants to close their doors forever by the end of March, and another 110,000 are expected to close this month. Over 3 million restaurant workers have already lost their jobs in March. Thousands more have seen furloughs and pay cuts. CEOs for Taco Bell, KFC, Olive Garden, and Texas Roadhouse have tried to smooth the bump by not accepting salaries during this time because, they're greedy rich people. But that can only go so far if the business isn't there, and disruptions are expected to last months, if not years, according to Business Insider. Meanwhile, states like Vermont and Michigan are banning the sale of seeds or plants as non-essential, even while grocery store shelves sell out and food banks across the country are reporting unprecedented demand and warning of a hunger crisis. This is bigger than you being annoyed because people are outside playing basketball. The number of people needing a meal at LA's Midnight Mission Soup Kitchen has tripled. Other food banks are reporting that demands have been increased eightfold. Here in Massachusetts, the Amherst Food Pantry saw an 849% increase. In Pittsfield, the Salvation Army Pantry saw an increase of 748%. Independence Pantry in Missouri, 300. St. Mary's in Phoenix, closer to 350. And yet, donations to some food banks, like those in Florida, have decreased by 90%. Now, I don't math, but even I can tell that those numbers aren't exactly lining up. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of cars can now be seen waiting in lines miles long at food banks in Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, and California. Last week, the San Antonio Food Bank gave food to 10,000 families in just one day, in their largest distribution day ever. The San Diego Food Bank reported that on Friday, over 1,000 cars were waiting in line before the food bank even opened. In some states, the National Guard has been called in to help maintain order and supplies, while pantries and food banks struggle to keep up. What we are looking at is bread lines. Legitimate Great Depression bread lines. I mentioned in a previous video that the Fed is predicting a total unemployment rate of 32% by the end of this. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the peak of the Great Depression saw about 25%. The economic fallout is only just starting, but it's already hitting hard. Again, this information is not meant to scare you or to show disrespect to the families who have lost loved ones or whatever other motivation you want to stick on it. The goal is to give you the information so you can do what you need to do to make sure you and your family make it through. As for this video, that's it for today. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment for the algorithms and check out the partners in the description. If you like my channel and want to give it a little extra support, you can find me on Patreon or Subscribestar, check out my merch, or give a one-time donation through PayPal. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, stay safe, and stay healthy.